People say Japan is a total contradiction. Walk through Tokyo during the day, and you see salarymen in crisp suits, bowing so perfectly you'd think they used a protractor. It's the land of ultimate politeness. But then, the sun goes down. The neon lights of Kabukicho flicker on, and you realize, wait a minute, this is the world's biggest adult film factory, a multi-billion-dollar empire built on desire. Most people think, oh, they're just stressed from work, so they've gone a bit crazy. But if you actually look at history and economics, you'll realize that's way too simple. Japan's obsession with erotica isn't a modern sickness. It's a 1,000-year-old survival tactic baked into their DNA. Let's start with the land itself. Japan is basically sitting on a pile of angry gunpowder, earthquakes, tsunamis, volcanoes. For them, these aren't aunts. In a century news stories, they're Tuesday in ancient times. A tsunami could wipe out a whole village in seconds. This constant threat of death planted a deep sense of nothingness in the Japanese soul. If life can end as fast as a summer breeze, then the most primitive human drive, sex, becomes the ultimate weapon to prove you're still alive. It's the middle finger to death. In ancient Japan, sex wasn't sinful. It was survival. Think about Western culture. Adam and Eve eat an apple, and suddenly they're terrified and hiding behind fig leaves. Original sin, right? But Japan's roots are in Shintoism. In Shintoism, sex isn't dirty, it's holy. Their Bible, the Kojiki, describes the creator gods making the islands through. Well, let's just say it's more graphic than a movie script. There are over 30 explicit scenes in their national holy book. For them, this energy was a way to chase away the darkness of disaster and disease. They even had festivals where people performed the act in public to pray for a good harvest. To an outsider, it looks like a wild party. To them, it was a high-stakes prayer for the survival of the species. This raw instinct turned into a busyness during the Edo period about 400 years ago. The government back then was clever and cold. They forced thousands of samurai to live in Tokyo without their families. Imagine thousands of bored, armed, single men with way too much testosterone. That's a recipe for a riot. So, the government built a steam valve, the Yoshiwara Red Light District. This was state-managed desire. They realized you can't block the pressure, so you might as well control it and tax the heck out of it. But they didn't just sell services. They sold status. To meet a top-tier courtesan in Iran, a man had to follow the 3-date rule. Date 1. You spend a fortune just to see her from across the room. You can't touch her. You can't even talk to her. Date 2. You get a little closer, but she still treats you like a ghost. Date 3. After you've spent your life savings on a new outfit and gifts, you finally get an all-access pass. The men weren't paying for the act. They were paying for the illusion of conquering a queen. In a society where commoners were treated like dirt, the red light district was the only place a poor merchant could feel like a king for a night. But then, history took a dark turn during the Meiji era. Japan wanted to be a superpower. They wanted warships and cannons, but they were broke. So, the government did something heartless. They encouraged the export of young girls to foreign countries to work in brothels. These girls were called karayuki-san. They were sent to Siberia, Africa, and Southeast Asia. Their blood and tears paid for the steel and the railways that modernized Japan. Even the guy on their biggest banknote, Fukuzawa Yukichi, basically said that sacrificing the virtue of poor women was a fair trade for the country's rise. This cold utility peaked during WY with the comfort women system. Women were stripped of their humanity and turned into military supplies. And even after Japan lost the war and was in ruins, the government set up pleasure stations for the occupying American soldiers. Why? To protect the respectable upper-class women from being bothered over and over. Japan's desire industry has been used as a shield for the state. Fast forward to 1956. Japan passed a law banning certain businesses, but they left a massive, hilarious loophole. The law said only a very specific act was illegal. So the businessmen got creative. We can't do that. How about we just offer massages in a bath? That's how the soapland was born. We can't do it in a shop. We'll deliver the service to your house. This one loophole created a multi-billion-dollar gray market with 1,000 different flavors. Then came the tech revolution. Remember the format war between Sony's Betamax and JVC's VHS. Sony was too proper and refused to let adult films use their tapes. JVC didn't care. The world's men voted with their wallets and their hormones. VHS won because it embraced the naughty content. This proves that human desire is the ultimate driver of technology. Today, we're in the era of the assembly line. Adult films in Japan are a factory, 30,000 titles a year. That's 100 new movies every day. It's industrial grade sugar. Fast, cheap dopamine for lonely office workers. But there's a side effect, desensitization. When you've spent all day eating industrial sugar, real life starts to taste bland. In modern Japan, young people find real dating too much work. A real partner is expensive. They have feelings, they argue, and they require return on investment. A subscription to a virtual site is cheaper and never says no. This has led to the sexless society. Japan produces the most adult content, but has the lowest birth rate. Men are becoming herbivores, and women are on strike, because being a wife in Japan's patriarchal culture feels like a trap. Why get married and do lonely parenting when you can stay single and keep your freedom? Japan has even created the companion economy. You can rent a girlfriend, rent a middle-aged man to listen to your problems, or even rent a grandma for $30 an hour to walk in the park with you. It's the ultimate tragedy. Real human connection has become a service you buy by the hour. This is the obituary of human emotion. It started as a fight against the fear of death, became a tool for the state, and ended as a virtual trap. Japan's present might be a prophecy for the rest of us. As AI and VR become more perfect and more submissive than real people, will we also choose the comfortable lie over the messy truth? In Japan, they have a censorship mosaic, that thin blur over adult content. It's the perfect metaphor for their culture. As long as I'm wearing a suit, and there's a tiny blur over the mess, I'm still a polite, respectable person. That's the most chilling part. It's not just about sin. It's about a civilization slowly choosing a silent, beautiful virtual ending over the struggle of being alive. Thanks for watching. If this deep dive gave you something to think about, hit that like button. See you in the next one.